Experts found something in this 1899 family picture that changed what we know about that era. The photograph arrived at the Library of Congress in January 2024 as part of a larger donation from the estate of Margaret Harrison Weber, who had passed away at age 93 in Burlington, Vermont. The collection included several dozen family photographs spanning from the 1890s through the 1960s, along with letters, documents, and personal papers documenting several generations of the Harrison family. Dr. Robert Chen, a historian specializing in race relations and social history of 19th century America, was cataloging the collection when he came across a formal family portrait dated 1899 on the back. The photograph showed a family of 6 posed in a Victorian parlor, parents seated in the center with 4 children arranged around them. Robert had examined thousands of family photographs from this era. They followed predictable patterns, formal poses, serious expressions, elaborate clothing meant to display the family's prosperity and respectability. This photograph seemed entirely typical at first glance. The father sat in an upholstered chair, wearing a dark suit with a watch chain visible across his vest. The mother sat beside him in a high-necked dress with leg of mutton sleeves, her hair styled in the Gibson girl fashion popular at the turn of the century. 4 children surrounded them, 2 boys and 2 girls, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 14, all dressed in their finest clothing. The setting was a well-appointed middle-class parlor. Patterned wallpaper covered the walls. A fireplace mantel displayed decorative objects. Framed pictures hung at precise intervals. Heavy curtains framed a window. Everything in the image spoke of respectability, propriety, and comfortable circumstances. Robert began his standard documentation process, photographing the image with high-resolution equipment and noting details for the catalog entry. He zoomed in to examine the photograph more closely, studying the clothing styles to confirm the date, looking at the background details to learn about the family's economic status. Then he noticed something that made him stop abruptly. One of the children, a boy of approximately 8 years old, seated on a small stool between his siblings, looked different from the others. Robert adjusted his camera's zoom, focusing on the child's face. His breath caught as the details became clear under magnification. The boy was not white. Robert stared at his computer screen, his heart racing. Under digital magnification, there was no question. The boy seated among the Harrison children had darker skin, broader facial features, and tightly curled hair, characteristics that clearly indicated African or mixed-race ancestry. This shouldn't be possible. Not in 1899. Not in a formal family portrait where a black child sat positioned exactly like the white children, dressed in identical clothing, with no visual markers of servitude or separate status. Robert had studied hundreds of photographs from this era that included both white and black subjects. In every case, the racial hierarchy was visually obvious. Black servants stood at the edges of frames, wore simpler clothing, were positioned lower or behind white family members. They were included as evidence of the white family's wealth and status, not as equal members. But this photograph showed something entirely different. The black boy sat at the same level as the white children. He wore the same style of suit as the other boy. His hair was carefully groomed. His posture matched theirs, formal, upright, hands folded in his lap. The photographer had positioned him not as a servant or subordinate, but as an integral part of the family composition. Robert examined the white children's body language. In photographs where black servants or workers appeared, white family members typically maintained visible physical distance. But in this image, one of the white girls had her hand resting on the black boy's shoulder, a gesture of familiarity and affection completely at odds with the racial norms of 1899. He checked the photograph's date again. Definitely 1899, based on the clothing styles, photographic technique, and the handwritten notation on the back. This was the height of the Jim Crow era. The Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896 had just legalized separate but equal segregation. Racial violence and lynching were at their peak. Southern states were passing laws designed to strip black citizens of voting rights and enforce rigid racial separation. Even in the North, where legal segregation was less formalized, social segregation was nearly absolute. Interracial adoption didn't exist in any recognized legal sense. The one-drop rule, the social and legal principle that any person with even one black ancestor was considered black, meant that a child of mixed race would be classified as black, regardless of appearance. Yet here was a photograph showing a black child integrated into a white family portrait, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Robert needed to know who these people were, and how this extraordinary image had come to exist. Robert turned to the documentation that had accompanied the photograph. The handwritten notation on the back read, "Harrison family, Woodford, Vermont, 1899. Woodford was a small town in southern Vermont, near the Massachusetts border. Robert had never heard of it, which wasn't surprising. Many small New England towns of that era had populations of only a few hundred people. He began with census records. The 1900 federal census, taken just months after the photograph was dated, listed the Harrison household in Woodford, Vermont. The head of household was James Harrison, age 42, occupation listed as sawmill operator. His wife was listed as Mary Harrison, age 38. 4 children were enumerated: Elizabeth, age 14, William, age 11, Sarah, age 9, and Thomas, age 8. Robert's pulse quickened when he saw Thomas's name. In the 1900 census, enumerators were required to record each person's race. The options were limited: white, black, Chinese, Japanese, or Indian. For the Harrison family, James, Mary, Elizabeth, William, and Sarah were all marked as W for white. Thomas was marked as B for black. Yet Thomas was listed with the same surname as the other children, Harrison. He was enumerated as living in the same household, in the same position in the family structure. The census didn't list him as a servant, boarder, or ward. He was simply listed as one of the children. Robert searched for birth records. Vermont had maintained vital records since 1857, so documentation should exist. He found birth certificates for Elizabeth Harrison, born 1886, and William Harrison, born 1889. Both listed James and Mary Harrison as parents. Sarah Harrison, born 1891, also listed James and Mary as parents. But when Robert searched for Thomas Harrison's birth record, what he found was far more complicated. Thomas had been born in August 1891, the same year as Sarah, making them nearly the same age. But his birth certificate told a different story than the other children's. Mother, Anna Freeman, colored. Father, James Harrison, white. The birth had been registered in Woodford, Vermont. Robert sat back, processing this information. Thomas was James Harrison's biological son, but not Mary's. He had been born to a black woman named Anna Freeman. And somehow, despite the racial climate of 1899, the Harrison family had raised him alongside their white children and included him in their family portrait as an equal member of the family. Robert needed to understand who Anna Freeman was and what had happened to her. If Thomas had been born in 1891 and was being raised by the Harrison family by 1899, Anna must have died or been unable to care for him. Robert searched Vermont vital records for Anna Freeman. He found her death certificate dated September 1891, just 3 weeks after Thomas's birth. Cause of death: complications of childbirth. She had been 24 years old. The certificate listed her as colored and unmarried. No father was listed for the child, though Thomas's birth certificate, filed separately, had identified James Harrison. Robert searched for more information about Anna Freeman. Census records showed that she had been living in Woodford in 1890, working as a domestic servant in the household of a local doctor. The 1880 census, when she would have been about 13, showed her living with her mother and siblings in Springfield, Massachusetts, part of a small black community there. At some point between 1880 and 1890, Anna had moved to Woodford, Vermont. The town's black population in 1890 was listed as exactly 3 people out of a total population of 347. Anna Freeman had been one of those 3, an isolated black woman working as a servant in an overwhelmingly white community. Robert found a reference to Anna in local church records. The Woodford Congregational Church Registry showed that Anna Freeman had been baptized there in 1890 and had attended services regularly. Several notations in the church records indicated that she had participated in church social activities and had been regarded as a member of the community, despite being one of the few black residents. Then Robert found something that began to clarify the relationship between Anna and James Harrison. In the records of the Woodford Sawmill Company, the business James Harrison operated, there was a payroll entry from 1890 showing that Anna Freeman had been employed as a cook at the mill's boarding house, where unmarried workers who came to work at the mill temporarily would stay and take their meals. James Harrison owned and operated the sawmill. Anna Freeman worked for him, cooking for his workers. In the small, isolated community of Woodford, they would have had regular contact, and at some point their relationship had become intimate, resulting in Anna's pregnancy. Robert found no evidence that James and Anna had ever married. Vermont law didn't prohibit interracial marriage in the 1890s, unlike many other states, but social pressure against such unions was intense even in relatively progressive New England communities. When Anna died in childbirth, James Harrison had faced a choice about what to do with his infant son. Robert found evidence of what happened next in an unexpected source, the personal diary of Reverend William Thatcher, the minister of Woodford Congregational Church from 1885 to 1905. The church had donated Reverend Thatcher's papers to the Vermont Historical Society decades earlier, and they had been digitized in 2015. Robert searched the digital archives and found entries from September 1891, right after Anna Freeman's death. Reverend Thatcher had written extensively about the situation, clearly troubled by the moral and social complexities it presented. September 20th, 1891. Anna Freeman died today, 3 weeks after giving birth to a son. The child's father is James Harrison, though this has not been publicly acknowledged. James came to see me this evening, deeply distressed. He says he cared for Anna, that their relationship was genuine, though it could not be formalized due to the prejudices of society. Now he must decide what to do with the infant. The child is his son, but he is already married to Mary, with 3 children. The situation is unprecedented in our community. September 22nd, 1891. James Harrison has made an extraordinary decision. He intends to raise the child. He has named him Thomas, in his own household, alongside his other children. He has informed his wife Mary of the situation. To my surprise, Mary has agreed to this arrangement. She says that the child is innocent and deserves a home, and that she will not punish an infant for circumstances beyond his control. I am astonished by her compassion, though I fear the social consequences this family will face. September 25th, 1891. I visited the Harrison household today to baptize the infant Thomas. James and Mary were both present, along with their 3 other children. Mary held Thomas during the baptism and afterward spoke to him tenderly. I asked her privately if she was certain about this decision. She said, "This child is my husband's son. That makes him family. I will raise him as I raise my own children, and I will not allow the prejudices of others to dictate how we care for an innocent baby." I have never encountered such moral courage. Robert sat reading these entries with growing amazement. Mary Harrison had agreed to raise her husband's child by another woman, a black woman, in 1891, in a small Vermont town, knowing the social consequences she would face. This wasn't a case of informal adoption or taking in an orphan. This was a white woman choosing to raise a visibly black child as her own son, alongside her white children, in full knowledge that society would condemn her for it. Reverend Thatcher's diary continued to document the Harrison family's situation over the following years, providing Robert with an intimate view of how this extraordinary arrangement unfolded. Reverend Thatcher's diary entries from the months and years following Thomas's birth revealed the social isolation and hostility the Harrison family faced for their decision. November 1891. The Harrison family has been largely ostracized by Woodford society. Several families have stopped attending church when they learned that Mary brings Thomas to services alongside her other children. Mrs. Patterson confronted Mary after services last Sunday, saying it was inappropriate for a white woman to be seen caring for a Negro child as if he were her own. Mary responded with remarkable dignity, saying that Thomas is indeed her own, that she is raising him as his mother, and that anyone who cannot accept this is free to avoid her company. 3 families left the church immediately and have not returned. March 1892. James Harrison's business has suffered due to his family situation. Several regular customers have taken their business to mills in neighboring towns, unwilling to patronize a man who has acknowledged a child with a Negro woman and raised that child in his white household. James remains resolute, saying he will not abandon his son to satisfy the prejudices of others. His financial situation is becoming difficult. June 1892. I spoke with Mary Harrison today about the challenges her family faces. She confided that they have been excluded from most social gatherings in Woodford. Her children are sometimes taunted by other children about their Negro brother. But Mary says they discuss these incidents as a family, teaching all the children that prejudice is wrong and that they must stand together. She says Elizabeth, William, and Sarah have grown very attached to Thomas and are protective of him. The diary showed that the Harrison family didn't hide Thomas or attempt to pass him off as white. They openly acknowledged his racial background and their unconventional family structure. This honesty, while morally admirable, came at a severe social and economic cost. But Reverend Thatcher's entries also showed that not everyone in the community responded with hostility. A small group of families, particularly Quakers and progressive Congregationalists, supported the Harrisons and maintained social relationships with them. These families became the Harrisons' social circle, a small community of people who valued justice and compassion over social convention. January 1895. The Harrison children are growing up remarkably well despite the social challenges they face. I visited their home today and observed the 4 children playing together. Thomas, now 3.5 years old, is included in everything his siblings do. There is genuine affection between them all. Elizabeth, age 9, is particularly protective of Thomas. When I commented on this, Mary said, "We have taught our children that Thomas is their brother in every way that matters. They have learned this truth so well that they cannot understand why others see him differently." Robert found the Reverend's observations moving and significant. The Harrison family wasn't just tolerating an unusual situation. They were actively creating a family bond that transcended racial categories. In 1899, America, this was revolutionary. Robert found the story behind the 1899 photograph itself in a letter from Mary Harrison to her sister in Boston, dated July 1899. The letter was preserved in the collection Margaret Harrison Weber had donated to the Library of Congress. "Dear sister," Mary wrote, "I am writing to tell you about a decision James and I have made. We have commissioned a family portrait to be taken by Mr. Stevens, the photographer from Bennington who visits Woodford twice yearly. I know you will understand the significance of this, though others may not. We are having all 4 children included in the portrait, Elizabeth, William, Sarah, and Thomas, positioned equally, dressed equally, presented as the family we are." The letter continued. "You asked me in your last letter whether we have considered the implications of having such a photograph made. Of course we have. We know it will serve as permanent evidence of our family's composition, that it could be used against us by those who already disapprove of how we have chosen to live. But that is precisely why we must have it made. Thomas is 8 years old now. He understands that he looks different from his siblings, that others treat him differently because of his color. We want him to have proof, tangible, permanent proof, that he is our son, our family, that we are proud to claim him. When he is grown, when we are gone, this photograph will testify to the truth, that we loved him without reservation, that we gave him the same place in our family we gave our other children." Mary's letter revealed that the photograph was not a casual family portrait, but a deliberate political and personal statement. The Harrisons knew that most families in their situation, white families raising black children, either hid those children from formal documentation or clearly marked their subordinate status. The Harrisons were choosing to do the opposite, to create permanent visual evidence of their family's integrated nature. Robert found the photographer's business records at the Bennington Museum. John Stevens had indeed operated a traveling photography business, visiting small towns throughout Vermont in the 1890s. His ledger from 1899 showed an entry for the Harrison family portrait, noting, "Family of 6, formal parlor composition, 1 full plate print." Note, family requested all children positioned equally in frame. Unusual composition, but client's wishes accommodated. Stevens had recognized that what the Harrisons wanted was unusual, that standard photographic conventions of the era would have positioned Thomas differently, marked his racial difference visually, even while including him in the frame. But the Harrisons had specifically requested equal positioning, and Stevens had honored that request. The photograph was taken in July 1899 in the Harrison family's parlor. The careful composition, expensive clothing, and formal poses all served a purpose: to create an image that documented the Harrison family's reality and their values, preserved for future generations. Robert found more information about Thomas's upbringing in school records and local newspaper archives. The Woodford School enrollment records from 1897 showed Thomas Harrison entering first grade at age 6, listed among the other students with no notation of his race. Unusual for the time, when many school systems segregated students, or at least marked black students' records differently. A newspaper article from the Bennington Banner dated 1898 mentioned Thomas indirectly in a piece about a school program. The students of Woodford School presented recitations and songs for their families last Friday evening. Young Thomas Harrison, age 7, recited Longfellow's The Children's Hour with admirable clarity and feeling, to warm applause from the assembled parents. Thomas had been integrated into the local school, performing alongside white children, receiving the same education. This was far from universal in 1899 America. Many northern schools were segregated by custom, if not by law, and black children often received inferior education or were excluded entirely from public schools in some communities. Robert found evidence that Thomas's inclusion in Woodford's school was not without controversy. The school board minutes from 1897 showed a heated debate about whether the Harrison boy should be admitted to the public school. Several board members argued that his presence would be disruptive and that separate arrangements should be made for his education. But James Harrison had attended that school board meeting and argued forcefully for his son's inclusion. The minutes recorded his statement: "Thomas is my son and a resident of this town. He has as much right to education in our public school as any child here. I pay taxes that support this school, and I expect my son to be educated here alongside his siblings. If you deny him this right, you deny it based solely on his color, which is a prejudice I will not accept." The board had ultimately voted 4-3 to admit Thomas, with Reverend Thatcher casting one of the deciding votes in favor. Thomas had attended Woodford School through 8th grade, the highest level of education available in the small town. Mary Harrison's letters to her sister documented Thomas's academic progress and social experiences. In 1900, she wrote, "Thomas is excelling in his studies, particularly in mathematics and composition. His teacher says he is among the brightest students in his class, but he still faces cruelty from some of the other children, who taunt him about his color and his family. Elizabeth and William defend him fiercely, which sometimes leads to conflicts. We have taught all our children that standing up against injustice is worth whatever social cost it carries." By 1903, when Thomas was 12, Mary wrote, "Thomas asks questions now that are difficult to answer. He wants to know why he looks different from us, why his mother, Anna, died, why some people treat him with contempt. James and I have always been honest with him about his origins. We told him that his mother Anna was a good woman whom James cared for deeply, that she died bringing him into the world, that we chose to raise him because he is family. Thomas seems to understand and accept this, though I see in his eyes that he carries pain about his place in the world." Robert traced Thomas Harrison's life beyond the 1899 photograph through subsequent census records and other documents. The 1910 census showed Thomas, age 19, still living with the Harrison family in Woodford. His occupation was listed as sawmill worker. He was working in his father's business alongside his brother William. But by the 1920 census, Thomas was no longer in Woodford. Robert found him in Springfield, Massachusetts, the same city where his mother Anna Freeman had grown up. Thomas was now 29, married to a woman named Clara, and working as a carpenter. They had 2 young children. Robert found Thomas's marriage record from 1912. He had married Clara Johnson, a black woman from Springfield, in a ceremony at an African Methodist Episcopal church. His parents were listed as witnesses. Both James and Mary Harrison had traveled to Springfield to attend their son's wedding. Through city directories and census records, Robert traced Thomas's life in Springfield. He had established himself as a skilled carpenter, eventually opening his own small furniture-making shop. He and Clara had raised 4 children. Thomas had been active in the local NAACP chapter and in his church. Robert found an oral history interview conducted in 1965 with Thomas's daughter Ruth as part of a project documenting the Black community in Springfield. Ruth, then in her 50s, had spoken about her father and his unusual upbringing. "My father was raised by a white family in Vermont," Ruth had told the interviewer. "His father was white, his mother was black and died when he was born. The white family, his father's wife and her children, raised him as one of their own. This was in the 1890s, when such a thing was almost unheard of. My father always said that his stepmother, Mary Harrison, saved his life. She could have sent him away to an orphanage or to be raised by strangers. Instead, she chose to raise him as her son, knowing the price she would pay in social standing and community acceptance." Ruth continued, "My father kept in touch with his white siblings his whole life. They visited us, we visited them. I grew up knowing my white aunts and uncles, playing with my white cousins. People in Springfield thought it was strange, but to us it was just family. My father always said that the Harrison family taught him that race was an artificial division, that love and loyalty were what mattered. He passed that belief on to us." Robert found letters exchanged between Thomas and his siblings long into adulthood. A letter from Elizabeth Harrison, written in 1925 when she was in her 50s and Thomas was in his 30s, showed the enduring bond between them. "Dear Thomas, it has been too long since we saw each other. William and Sarah send their love, as does Mother. Father's health continues to decline, but he speaks of you often and with great pride. You should know that raising you was never a burden to our family. You were and are our beloved brother." The photograph we had taken in 1899 hangs in Mother's parlor still, and she looks at it daily, remembering when we were all young together. Robert spent 8 months researching and developing an exhibition around the 1899 Harrison family photograph. He titled it, "Family Beyond Color, The Harrison Family and Race in Turn-of-the-Century Vermont." The photograph would serve as the centerpiece, but the exhibition would tell the full story of how one family had challenged the racial norms of their era. The exhibition opened at the Library of Congress in September 2024. The photograph was displayed prominently, enlarged so visitors could see every detail: the careful composition, the equal positioning of all 4 children, Thomas's visible presence as a full member of the family. Accompanying text explained what made the image so extraordinary. This 1899 photograph shows something almost unprecedented in American history: a white family raising a black child as an equal member of their family during the height of the Jim Crow era. Thomas Harrison, the black child in this photograph, was the biological son of James Harrison, the father, and Anna Freeman, a black woman who died in childbirth. Rather than sending Thomas to an orphanage or having him raised separately, James Harrison's wife Mary chose to raise him alongside her white children, facing social ostracism and economic hardship for this decision. The exhibition included James and Mary Harrison's letters, Reverend Thatcher's diary entries, school records showing Thomas's education, and documentation of the family's social isolation and the support they received from a small group of progressive community members. It showed census records tracking Thomas through his adult life, his marriage, his children, and his successful career in Springfield. Robert had located several of Thomas Harrison's living descendants, great-grandchildren who still lived in Massachusetts and Vermont. They attended the exhibition opening, bringing their own family photographs and stories that showed how Thomas's integration into the Harrison family had created an extended multiracial family network that persisted through 5 generations. One of Thomas's great-granddaughters, a woman named Angela, spoke at the opening. "My great-grandfather Thomas died before I was born, but his story has always been central to our family's identity. He was raised by people who chose love over prejudice, who valued human dignity over social acceptance. That choice in 1891 created ripples that extended through generations. I exist because Mary Harrison chose to be a mother to a child who wasn't biologically hers, who didn't look like her, whom society told her she should reject. Her courage gave Thomas a life, and that life led to my grandmother, my mother, and me." The exhibition attracted national attention. News media covered the story of the photograph and what it revealed about the complexity of race relations in turn-of-the-century America. Historians began researching similar cases, looking for other examples of families who had challenged racial boundaries in this era. What Robert's research revealed was that the Harrison family's story, while extraordinary, was not entirely unique. He found evidence of other interracial families in isolated northern communities during this period, families that existed in the margins of American society, largely undocumented, their stories lost to history because they didn't fit the dominant narratives of complete racial separation. The 1899 photograph had survived because Thomas's descendants had preserved it, understanding its significance even when the broader historical community had no framework for interpreting it. Now, 125 years after it was taken, the photograph was teaching new lessons about the diversity of historical experience, about how some people had resisted racial hierarchies even in the most oppressive eras, and about how families could be built on choice and love rather than just biology and race. 6 months after the exhibition opened, Robert received a letter from a genealogist in Ohio. "I've been researching my family history," the letter read, "and I found a photograph from 1903 that shows my white great-great-grandmother with a black child. I always assumed the child was a servant, but after seeing the Harrison family exhibition, I looked more closely. The child is positioned like family, dressed well, included in the composition as an equal. Your research has given me a new lens for understanding my own family's history. I'm now trying to find out who that child was and what her story might have been." The Harrison family photograph had opened doors, had changed how historians and genealogists looked at other images from this era, had challenged assumptions about the absolute nature of racial segregation in turn-of-the-century America. Robert stood in the exhibition hall one evening after closing, looking at the photograph that had started everything. 6 people in a Vermont parlor in 1899, posing for a camera with serious expressions and formal clothes. A family that looked ordinary until you noticed the detail that changed everything. A black child among white children, loved and claimed and documented as belonging. Mary Harrison had been right when she wrote to her sister about why they needed this photograph made. It had served as proof that Thomas was family, proof that love could transcend race, proof that even in 1899, some people had chosen a different path than the one society demanded. The photograph no longer hid its extraordinary story. Thomas Harrison's presence in that family portrait, once just a curious detail, now testified to a profound truth, that the history of race in America was more complex, more varied, more human than the simple narratives of complete separation suggested. That resistance to injustice took many forms, including the quiet, daily choice to love across racial boundaries. That family could be built on moral courage as much as on biology, and that sometimes a single photograph could contain evidence that changed what we thought we knew about an entire era, if only we learned to look closely enough to see what had been hiding in plain sight for more than a century.